Ethan cross-eyed with his cheek against a penthouse window, watching the city celebrate beneath him, while no one answered his final call. When he opened his eyes again, a terrified woman was whispering his name from the edge of a hotel bed. Evelyn Shaw's pupils were unfocused, one hand clutching the torn strap of her dress while the other searched blindly for something she could use as a weapon. Beyond the locked door, men laughed as if her fear belonged to them. Ethan knew that room. He knew the champagne stain on the carpet, the hidden camera inside the smoke detector, and the photograph that would appear on every front page before sunrise. He had spent 12 years wishing he could return to this exact minute. In the life he remembered, he had awakened drugged and half-dressed beside Evelyn. Marcus had told him nothing serious happened, only to release edited footage 3 days later when Ethan refused to finance another reckless scheme. The footage had made Ethan look like a predator, and Evelyn look like a willing guest who changed her story. The truth never mattered after that. Her career died first, then her grandfather's health, then the fragile peace between their families. Now Evelyn dragged a brass lamp from the nightstand and raised it with both hands. "Stay away from me," she said, though the tremor in her voice revealed how hard she was fighting to remain conscious. Ethan looked down and found his shirt open, his knuckles bruised, and a crystal glass lying near his shoe. A chemical bitterness coated his tongue. Someone had drugged him too, just not enough to make him helpless. "You're right to be afraid," he said, backing toward the bathroom with both hands visible. "But if you fall asleep now, the men outside that door will decide what the world believes happened in here." Evelyn's gaze darted toward the door. Marcus knocked in their old childhood rhythm, 2 quick taps, 1 slow, and called, "Ethan, quit pretending to be shy. We only need 30 seconds of footage." The voice tore through Ethan more cleanly than death had. Marcus had stood beside him at his mother's funeral, held his father while he collapsed, and taken the company only after there was no family left to resist him. Ethan's first instinct was to open the door and break Marcus's jaw. Then he remembered how that had ended in the first life, one burst of anger, one convenient witness, and another piece of evidence shaped to fit the monster everyone expected. He picked up the room phone instead. The line was dead. His cell showed no signal, even beside the window, which meant Marcus had brought a portable jammer and planned far beyond a humiliating prank. Evelyn's knees buckled. Ethan moved before thinking, caught her by the elbow, and immediately released her when she recoiled. "Bathroom," he said. "Lock yourself inside. Turn on the shower and stay awake." "Why should I listen to you?" she demanded. It was the correct question, and Ethan had no honest answer that could fit inside the few minutes they possessed. "Because I invited you here to frighten you into hearing me out," he said. "That was cruel, arrogant, and entirely my fault. But I did not drug you, and I will prove it before I ask you to believe anything else." The confession changed her expression more than a denial would have. Evelyn lowered the lamp by an inch, studying him as if the reckless Heir she despised had been replaced by a stranger wearing his face. Ethan pointed to the mirrored closet. In his memory, Cole had hidden a second camera behind it when the smoke detector angle failed. If that camera was already recording, it could preserve what Marcus expected never to be seen. Evelyn used the lamp to smash the closet mirror. Behind the glass, a red diode blinked beside a miniature lens, and a wire disappeared through a drilled hole toward the adjoining suite. "Don't pull it," Ethan warned. "If the feed stops, they'll know we found it." Evelyn nodded once, not trusting him but trusting the logic. Ethan poured the champagne into a towel instead of the sink, preserving a sample. As the bottle emptied, a memory flashed before him. Tomorrow's market board, a freight company collapsing at precisely 11:47. Then the company's name vanished from the memory. Ethan still saw the plunging red line and his father's gray face, but the letters on the screen had become an empty blur. He gripped the basin, suddenly unable to breathe. He had changed one physical detail from the night he remembered, and something from the future had been taken in exchange. Evelyn saw his panic and mistook it for the drug. She filled a glass with tap water, set it within reach, and told him not to lose consciousness before he explained why men were filming them. Her small act of mercy hurt more than the fear in her eyes. In the first life, Ethan had accepted her public destruction because defending her would have required admitting his own shameful intention. He tore the battery from the bedside clock and used its metal spring to short the jammer's exposed charging port beneath Marcus's discarded bag. The signal indicator on his phone returned with a single weak bar. Ethan sent Detective Elena Ruiz a silent emergency message containing the hotel, room number, and the words suspected drugging and hidden cameras. He chose Ruiz because, in the old future, she had refused cross money even while investigating him. Marcus knocked again, amusement leaving his voice. "Open the door, Ethan. Your father's board meeting starts in 2 hours, and you don't want me sending him the wrong version of tonight." That threat revealed the real target. Evelyn was not merely bait for a scandal. The footage was meant to control Ethan during a corporate decision important enough to prepare drugs, cameras, and a signal jammer. Ethan whispered a plan to Evelyn. She listened, corrected 2 weak points, and insisted on holding the champagne towel herself. It was evidence taken from her room, and she would not let another cross man decide where it went. Ethan opened the door wearing the lazy smile Marcus had seen 1,000 times. "You always become dramatic when a party takes longer than expected," he said, deliberately slurring the final word. Marcus entered alone at first, careful enough to keep Cole and Ryan in the adjoining suite. His gaze swept over the bed, Evelyn's bare feet near the bathroom, and Ethan's open shirt. Satisfaction flickered before concern covered it. "What did you give us?" Ethan asked, sounding impressed rather than angry. Vanity had always made Marcus careless when he believed someone admired his cleverness. Marcus did not confess. He laughed and said Ethan had consumed the same champagne he ordered every weekend, then glanced involuntarily toward the wet towel clenched in Evelyn's hand. Evelyn caught the glance. "If it was ordinary champagne," she said, steadier now, "why did your security company disable the room phone 12 minutes before we arrived?" Marcus's face changed for less than a second, but the hidden camera captured it. He stepped toward Evelyn and told her she was confused, overtired, and likely embarrassed by choices she would regret in daylight. The words were polished, almost gentle. Ethan remembered how effectively Marcus made victims doubt their own memories, and how often Ethan had mistaken that cruelty for intelligence. "She didn't make a choice," Ethan said. "I invited her under false pretenses. I own that part. You own whatever was in the bottle." Marcus stared at him with genuine surprise. Ethan Cross had spent his entire youth escaping blame. Accepting even a fraction of it made him unpredictable in a way no future scheme had accounted for. Cole entered when Marcus signaled, carrying a master key and a hotel security badge. Ryan followed with a phone held low against his thigh, its camera aimed at the bed. Evelyn retreated exactly as planned, drawing their attention toward the bathroom while Ethan moved between her and the door. The hidden closet camera continued recording every angle Marcus believed he controlled. Marcus told Ryan to take Evelyn's towel. Ryan hesitated after seeing her bleeding palm where the broken mirror had cut her, and that hesitation gave Ethan the first human weakness in Marcus's team. Ethan addressed Ryan, not Marcus. "When this becomes a criminal case, whose name is on the room? Whose card bought the champagne? And who do you think Marcus plans to blame when my father's lawyers arrive?" Ryan's eyes moved toward the table, where the hotel receipt carried his signature. Marcus had prepared a scapegoat before preparing the victim. Marcus ordered Cole to seize Ethan's phone. Cole rushed forward, but Ethan did not throw the first punch. He sidestepped, caught Cole's wrist, and let the man crash into the drinks cart on camera. Glass shattered just as the hotel fire alarm began screaming. Evelyn had pressed the bathroom alarm with steam and a burning hand towel, forcing staff to unlock every electronically sealed corridor. Marcus lunged for the closet camera. Evelyn swung the brass lamp into his forearm, not as a helpless woman waiting to be saved but as the person who had understood the evidence mattered most. Police voices sounded in the hall. Marcus looked at Ethan, then at the blinking camera, and realized the night no longer belonged to him. "You have no idea what you just traded away," Marcus whispered. The words were soft enough for Ethan alone, and they confirmed Marcus knew this reversal carried a price. Detective Ruiz entered with hotel security and found Ethan holding Cole on the floor, Evelyn guarding the camera, Ryan frozen beside the signed receipt, and Marcus standing calmly at the center of his failed design. Reese separated everyone before questions began. Ethan obeyed without calling his father, while Marcus immediately requested the Vane family attorney and accused Ethan of organizing the entire encounter. A paramedic tried to place Evelyn on a stretcher. She refused until Reese personally sealed the champagne towel, camera card, receipt, and jammer in separate evidence bags. Only then did Evelyn's strength fail. As her body folded, Ethan moved toward her, stopped himself, and watched Reese catch her instead. Evelyn noticed that pause before the sedative pulled her under. For the first time that night, Ethan had placed her sense of safety above his need to appear protective. At the hospital, doctors confirmed Evelyn had received a memory-suppressing sedative combined with a muscle relaxant. Ethan's blood contained a lower dose of an impulse-enhancing stimulant. The mixture was designed to leave Evelyn unable to resist or recall clearly while making Ethan aggressive, suggestible, and conscious enough to become the perfect culprit. Ethan heard the explanation from the next treatment bay and vomited until nothing remained. In the old life, he had spent years wondering whether he crossed an unforgivable line. Now he understood someone had engineered that uncertainty. Relief did not absolve him. He had still lured Evelyn to a hotel because rejection had wounded his pride, and Marcus's plan worked only because Ethan had already made himself easy to believe guilty. Richard Cross arrived with 2 attorneys, a private doctor, and enough authority to transform the hospital corridor into occupied territory. He ordered Ethan discharged before reporters learned which floor they were on. Ethan refused. Richard stared as if the stimulant had permanently altered his son's mind, because the Ethan he knew never remained where consequences could reach him. "If I disappear now, Evelyn becomes the only person left beneath the cameras," Ethan said. "I put her in that room. I won't leave her there alone again." Richard's anger sharpened into fear. "Do you understand what one careless statement can do to this family before the board vote?" Ethan finally connected Marcus's threat to the blurred market memory. Something at Cross Dominion would happen before noon, and the scandal was designed to keep him frightened, obedient, or absent. Reporters crowded the hospital entrance before dawn. Ethan ignored the attorney's prepared denial and stepped toward the microphones with the bruise from coal already darkening across his jaw. He admitted that he had invited Evelyn to the suite under false pretenses because he believed money and persistence entitled him to her attention. The cameras fell strangely quiet when the notorious Heir supplied his own most damaging fact. Ethan then stated that both of them had been drugged, that hidden cameras and a jammer had been recovered, and that he would release no detail of Evelyn's condition without her consent. A reporter asked whether he was claiming to be a hero. Ethan answered, "No. I'm admitting I helped create the danger before I stopped it." The statement destroyed the clean defense his attorneys wanted, but it also prevented Marcus from controlling the first public version of the night. Evelyn watched the broadcast from her hospital bed. She felt no gratitude, only exhausted surprise that Ethan had confessed the humiliating truth instead of purchasing a more convenient one. Judge Arthur Shaw arrived ready to have Ethan arrested, sued, and possibly buried beneath the courthouse. Evelyn stopped him long enough to play the unedited camera footage. Arthur watched Ethan admit his deception, preserve evidence, refuse to touch Evelyn without permission, and place himself between her and 3 men he once called friends. "A man can do one decent thing for selfish reasons," Arthur said. Evelyn agreed, but asked him not to turn her experience into a family war before the investigation established facts. Ethan entered only after a nurse said Evelyn had requested him. He remained beside the open door, far enough away that she never had to ask for distance. "I heard your statement," Evelyn said. Her voice was raw. "You do not get credit for telling the truth after arranging the lie that brought me there." "I know." Ethan had rehearsed apologies throughout the first life, each one built to obtain forgiveness. Now he let the 2 words stand without bargaining. Evelyn asked what Marcus meant when he said Ethan had traded something away. Ethan considered inventing a sensible answer, then admitted he did not know but believed Marcus had expected a corporate crisis that morning. He told her about the market image whose company name had vanished when he changed the champagne's fate. He did not call it reincarnation or ask her to believe him. He described the experience as evidence he could not yet explain. Evelyn studied his face for mockery and found fear instead. "If you are lying, it is an absurd lie," she said. "If you are not, then you should be more frightened than you look." Ethan answered that he was terrified, especially because the memories he valued most were not market prices but the people he had already watched die. Arthur ordered him out before the conversation became sympathy. Ethan left immediately, which unsettled the judge more than resistance would have. In the hospital elevator, Ethan called his mother. Grace answered on the second ring, alive, sleepy, and angry enough to make his knees weaken. He had forgotten the exact sound she made before scolding him. Hearing it again broke the restraint he had maintained through police, reporters, and Evelyn's questions. Grace found him sitting on the mansion floor 20 minutes later, still holding the phone. Ethan wrapped both arms around her waist like a child and wept into the robe she had thrown over her nightclothes. She did not understand why her son mourned while holding her. She only stroked his hair and whispered that whatever he had done, they would face it awake rather than hide until morning. Richard arrived behind them, furious at the press conference, and shaken by the sight of Ethan crying. His raised hand stopped before becoming the slap both men expected. Ethan told his parents everything he could prove: Marcus's setup, the hotel receipt, the jammer, and the threat concerning the board. He kept the second life to himself because impossible truth would distract from immediate danger. Richard said Victor Vane had stood beside him for 20 years and had no reason to destroy Cross Dominion. Ethan almost replied that hatred could kneel patiently beside guilt, but the missing company name forced him toward a more practical argument. He closed his eyes and reconstructed the market memory through surrounding details: a blue anchor logo, a credit alert, an insurance certificate, and Richard saying they had released $200 million too early. Cross Dominion had only one pending credit line of that size involving a blue anchor, North Harbor Freight, scheduled for approval at 9:30. Ethan asked Richard to delay the transfer and verify the policy directly with its underwriter. Richard refused to endanger a major client based on the fragmented vision of a son still testing positive for drugs. Ethan placed his trust fund documents on the table and offered every share he personally owned if the warning proved false. It was not bravado. Losing inherited wealth now frightened him less than watching Richard die again. Grace recognized the difference and asked Richard what 3 hours of verification would cost compared with $200 million and their son's last remaining faith. Richard agreed to the delay, but ordered Maya Chin to supervise Ethan and remove him from headquarters if he interfered with operations. At 8:20, Ethan entered Cross Dominion carrying no entourage, no sunglasses, and no defense against the silent judgment of employees watching his confession replay on lobby screens. Maya met him beside the elevators. She had once remained with Richard until the company's final lights went dark, but now she regarded Ethan as the spoiled heir most likely to extinguish them. Ethan addressed her as Ms. Chin, apologized for interrupting her work, and gave her the 4 details he had reconstructed without claiming certainty. Maya contacted the insurer through a number obtained independently from regulatory records, bypassing both North Harbor and its broker. The underwriter confirmed that the policy had expired 6 months earlier. The renewal certificate carried a valid executive signature attached to a policy number belonging to an entirely different vessel. At 9:17, regulators froze North Harbor's accounts after tracing shell payments through its freight insurance reserve. Cross Dominion canceled the transfer 13 minutes before release. Ethan waited for triumph and instead lost another memory. His mother's final hospital room disappeared, leaving only the knowledge that she had once died there, and that he had arrived too late. While executives celebrated the money saved, Ethan gripped the conference table and understood the true cruelty of his second chance. Every life he rescued might erase the last private moment he had shared with the person he saved. Maya ended the celebration by sending everyone back to work. She found Ethan alone after the conference room emptied, staring at his mother through the glass wall as if Grace might disappear when he blinked. "You saved the company $200 million, Maya said. "Most men in your position would already be choosing the headline." Ethan answered that he had just lost something worth more than the company, but could not explain what. Maya assumed the drugs were still affecting him and called the company physician. Ethan allowed the examination because refusing sensible help simply to protect a secret would be another version of his old arrogance. The physician found no immediate danger, though Ethan's blood pressure was dangerously high. He advised rest. Richard instead summoned his son to the executive floor, where Victor Vane was already waiting beside the windows. Victor embraced Ethan with practiced paternal warmth, and said Marcus must have fallen in with terrible people. Ethan smelled the same cedar cologne that had filled the room when Victor took control of Cross Dominion in the old life. For one violent second, Ethan imagined driving Victor through the glass. Then Victor asked whether the North Harbor warning had come from Marcus, and Ethan heard the trap hidden beneath the concern. If Ethan said yes, Victor could dismiss the warning as part of Marcus's hotel scheme. If he said no, he would have to explain knowledge no ordinary heir could possess. Ethan answered that North Harbor's policy number had appeared in documents Marcus once left open during a poker game. The lie was imperfect, but it made carelessness, not prophecy, the source of his suspicion. Victor smiled and praised Ethan's memory. Richard did not smile. His son had never remembered a contract number, birthday, or promise unless it served an immediate pleasure. After Victor left, Richard locked the door and demanded the real explanation. Ethan asked whether the answer mattered more than the forged certificate that had nearly emptied their reserves. "It matters if I am deciding whether to trust my company to a son I no longer recognize," Richard said, and the fear beneath his anger silenced Ethan. Ethan could not reveal a second life without sounding insane, but another lie would preserve the exact distance he had returned to repair. He chose a smaller truth. "Something happened last night. I saw what I'd become if I keep living this way." Richard waited for the usual grin that turned sincerity into a joke. None came. He looked toward Grace, but she only said their son had been crying before dawn and refused to tell either man what that proved. Richard ordered Maya to audit every Vanelink transaction. He then assigned Ethan to strategic development, a 6-person department known inside the company as the basement without stairs. The department occupied a windowless floor between document storage and building maintenance. Its shelves held abandoned proposals, obsolete market studies, and awards earned by executives who had since escaped to better jobs. Lena Ortiz, the acting manager, greeted Ethan with a resignation letter. "I have survived 3 reorganizations," she said. "I will not let rehabilitating a billionaire's son become the 4th." Ethan recognized Lena as the woman who, in the old life, had warned him that Marcus was stripping crossports before anyone else understood the pattern. Ethan had fired her for embarrassing him during a board dinner. He read the resignation twice. The first page described years of ignored work, the second named him as the final humiliation. Ethan removed only the second page and returned the rest. "Keep the reasons that belong to this company," he said. "Give me 30 days to make sure I am not one of them. If I fail, I will sign the resignation myself and attach a recommendation no one can bury." Lena did not soften, but she folded the letter instead of leaving it on his desk. That was more trust than Ethan deserved and precisely enough to begin. Richard expected Ethan to analyze a luxury marina project favored by the board. Ethan opened the proposal and remembered its groundbreaking ceremony, followed years later by empty towers and a pension fund lawsuit. He also remembered another image, cargo cranes moving through a blackout because a row of white battery cabinets kept the port alive. The manufacturer's name remained clear, Helix Storage, but every address connected to it had disappeared. Ethan asked the team what happened to a modern port when power failed for 6 minutes. Noah Price, the youngest analyst, answered that cranes froze, refrigerated cargo warmed, and navigation systems lost synchronized records. Lena added that diesel generators protected essential systems, but reacted slowly, polluted heavily, and cost a fortune to maintain. Ethan asked whether batteries could bridge the gap without replacing the generators entirely. The room changed when the question became practical. Engineers drew load curves, Noah searched insurance claims, and 2 analysts who had ignored Ethan began arguing over storage chemistry. Ethan told them only that he had once heard the name Helix connected to a safer separator. He did not promise success or mention the future because the team needed a trail they could test without believing in him. 12 companies used some version of the name. 1 sold imported phone chargers, 3 existed only on paper, and another claimed its batteries could be healed with music. By midnight, Noah found a university patent citing an unpublished ceramic membrane developed by Dr. Samuel Reed. The patent's mailing address belonged to an abandoned machine shop outside Pittsburgh. Ethan thanked Noah before the entire team, and included his name in the report to Maya. Noah looked behind himself, as if praise from an executive must have been intended for someone else. Lena agreed to travel with Ethan, but set 3 conditions: no private jet, no promises made without financial review, and no using her as the adult who approved a rich heir's impulse. Ethan accepted all 3. On the commercial flight, turbulence spilled coffee across his notes, and Lena watched him laugh instead of summoning an employee to blame. "You are either changing," she said, "or becoming much better at theater." Ethan replied that she should continue assuming theater until the work survived after the curtain fell. Helix Storage occupied the 2nd floor above a machine shop that had stopped paying for heat. Samuel Reed wore fingerless gloves while dismantling a test rig for parts he could sell. Samuel recognized Ethan from the hospital broadcast and refused to shake his hand. "I do not need investment from a man trying to purchase a cleaner reputation," the old Ethan would have reminded Samuel, who controlled the nearest ports. The new Ethan looked at the cold laboratory, the exhausted technicians, and a burn scar climbing Samuel's wrist. "Then do not take money for my reputation," Ethan said. "Take it if our port problem deserves your science. Reject it if the numbers fail." Samuel agreed to give them 20 minutes. He demonstrated a ceramic membrane intended to keep heat from jumping between damaged cells, but admitted 3 earlier prototypes had caught fire. Ethan remembered a future presentation explaining that the failure came from microscopic cracks formed during high-pressure curing. When he tried to recall the recommended temperature, only a woman's blurred voice remained. He refused to manufacture an answer. Instead, he asked Samuel whether the cracks appeared before or after the membrane entered the cell casing. The question led Samuel to retrieve imaging records. Lena noticed the failures clustered around one outsourced curing facility, while successful samples came from Helix's slower laboratory oven. They had not discovered a miraculous formula. They had found evidence that production pressure, not the underlying design, was causing inconsistent membranes. Samuel's hostility weakened into professional attention. He showed them a contained fire test in which one cell burned for 9 minutes without igniting the module beside it. Lena calculated that 9 minutes gave a trained port crew enough time to isolate a cabinet. She also calculated Helix needed at least 18 months and $12 million before it could meet commercial volume. Ethan remembered offering too much too quickly in the old life whenever he wanted admiration. This time he asked Samuel what control he needed to protect the research from a future owner. Samuel wanted his team retained, the patents kept with Helix, independent publication of safety failures, and the right to reject unsafe production targets. Lena drafted terms giving Cross-Dominion a minority stake and exclusive port applications, subject to technical milestones. Ethan added that no forced sale clause could activate while Samuel met safety disclosures. Samuel studied the offer, then asked why the Heir would accept limited control over the invention he financed. Ethan answered, "Because people who can fire the scientist for telling the truth eventually teach the science to lie." Samuel still did not sign. His lender had scheduled foreclosure in 9 days, and any investor would have to clear a secured claim before touching the company. Lena examined the loan documents and found the lender hidden behind 3 shell companies. The final registered agent also represented Vane Capital. Ethan's unease became physical. Marcus had not begun fighting after the hotel. He had already been collecting vulnerable technologies while pretending to waste his life beside Ethan. Lena asked whether he wanted to withdraw now that the Vane family was involved. Ethan said involvement was not proof of wrongdoing, but it made independent due diligence non-negotiable. Maya joined by video, challenged every assumption, and reduced the proposed bridge loan to enough money for payroll and foreclosure delay. Samuel accepted only after Maya confirmed the safety milestones in writing. When Ethan signed the conditional authorization, a memory vanished, Samuel standing beside a burned laboratory in the old future, pointing towards someone responsible for the fire. Ethan remembered the flames and Samuel's grief but no longer remembered the culprit's face. The cost was not simply losing profitable information, it was losing warnings that could keep the people before him alive. He wrote the surviving fragments in a pocket notebook before they faded further. Lena noticed his shaking hand but respected his silence until he closed the cover. Marcus called from his attorney's office while Ethan and Lena drove toward the airport. His voice carried none of the panic expected from a man under criminal investigation. "Congratulations on Helix," Marcus said. "You found the little furnace earlier than last time." Ethan stopped breathing. Lena glanced over, but he raised one finger and switched the call to speaker so there would be a witness. Marcus immediately became careful. He claimed he meant Ethan's previous interest in batteries, then asked whether Richard had remembered his heart medication for the emergency board session. The call ended before Ethan could respond. Marcus had delivered 2 messages. He knew something about Ethan's altered memories, and Richard was in immediate danger. Ethan called Grace. She said Richard's cardiologist had prescribed emergency tablets months earlier, but Richard kept them in a desk because carrying them made him feel old. In Ethan's remaining memory, his father suffered chest pain during a board crew, refused an ambulance, and lost enough heart function to begin the decline that ended with his death. Lena changed their flight while Ethan sent Maya the Helix documents and asked her to delay the board meeting. Maya replied that Victor had already convened it and barred Ethan as a conflict risk. They landed 40 minutes later. Ethan ran from the terminal in yesterday's shirt, carrying Samuel's test module like evidence in a case no one had agreed to hear. At headquarters, security blocked him under Victor's written instruction. Lena called Maya, but the boardroom doors had been sealed for a confidential vote. Ethan did not assault the guards or invoke his surname. He triggered the building's medical protocol by reporting a cardiac risk inside the room, forcing security to send the company physician upstairs. The boardroom opened for the doctor, and Maya stepped into the corridor. Ethan gave her the foreclosure chain linking Helix to Vane Capital and the recording of Marcus's call. Inside, Victor argued that Richard's failure to detect North Harbor proved Cross-Dominion needed an independent chairman. He presented himself as the loyal friend willing to bear an unpleasant duty. Maya interrupted with notice that Vane Capital was quietly foreclosing on Helix while Victor's motion described Ethan's investment in the same company as irrational waste. Directors demanded an explanation. Victor said debt collection did not imply faith in the underlying patents and accused Ethan of manufacturing suspicion to distract from the hotel scandal. Ethan entered only after Maya invited him as the executive sponsor of the proposal. He did not claim that Helix would revolutionize energy. He presented the narrower port problem, the test results, and the limits Lena had documented. Samuel appeared by video and answered technical questions without praising Ethan. 2 shipping insurers confirmed they would discount premiums if independent tests reproduced the containment time. The proposal looked credible because it contained risks, conditions, and people willing to contradict its sponsor. Victor could attack Ethan's character, but not erase the work done by everyone else. Victor withdrew his motion before a formal defeat could expose which directors supported him. He smiled at Richard, apologized for allowing concern to become impatience, and preserved every alliance for another day. Richard waited until the room emptied before pressing 2 fingers beneath his collar. Sweat darkened his shirt, but he ordered Maya to bring back the directors and finish pending business. Ethan placed the emergency tablet in his father's palm. Richard stared at it, then at the desk drawer across the room where he believed the medication still remained. "How did you know?" Richard asked. Ethan could lie about Grace, but the missing hospital memory made another convenient deception feel unbearable. "I remember losing you," he said. "I cannot explain it in a way you will accept yet. Please take the pill before you decide whether I am insane." Richard's pride resisted until a second wave of pain bent him against the table. He swallowed the tablet, and Ethan called the physician despite his father's command to wait. The doctor detected an arterial blockage early enough for immediate treatment. Richard was furious inside the ambulance, but his hand remained locked around Ethan's wrist throughout the ride. Grace reached the hospital and struck Richard's shoulder with her handbag for hiding months of symptoms. Then she turned on Ethan for believing that saving his father excused terrorizing everyone with secrecy. Ethan accepted the anger until Grace's voice broke. He drew both parents into an awkward embrace beside the vending machines, and Richard muttered that emotional scenes were bad for cardiac patients. Grace laughed through tears. Ethan could not remember her final hospital room anymore, but he was creating a new memory of the three of them alive together. Richard's procedure succeeded. The doctor said waiting until symptoms became undeniable would likely have caused permanent damage, confirming that Ethan had altered another death without needing to understand the mechanism. The price arrived quietly. Ethan opened his notebook and discovered he could no longer recall why the Ashford name, written 3 times in the margin, filled him with dread. That evening, Lena's team brought grocery store cake to the hospital waiting room. They celebrated Helix without pretending the company had been saved by one brilliant heir. Noah asked whether Ethan planned to remain after his reputation recovered. Ethan said he no longer trusted promises about the man he would be forever, but could promise to arrive tomorrow and be answerable for that day. Lena lifted a paper cup. "A promise measured in one day can still become a life," she said, and Ethan wrote the sentence beneath the fading word Ashford. Detective Rees interrupted with news that Ryan Bell had asked for protection. The hotel receipt in Ryan's name had frightened him more than loyalty to Marcus could reassure him. Ryan met Rees in a church parking lot, where no cross-employee was permitted. He admitted installing the jammer and cameras but claimed Marcus said the plan was only to frighten Ethan into obeying Victor. He surrendered payment records and the original camera transmitter, which had automatically stored an unedited copy in its internal memory when the network failed. The footage captured Marcus directing camera placement, checking the drugged bottle, and instructing Ryan to make sure Ethan remained conscious. Before Rees could move Ryan to a secure location, a motorcycle accelerated through the parking lot. Ethan saw the rider angle toward Ryan and dragged him behind a stone planter. The motorcycle clipped Ethan's shoulder and threw him across the pavement. Ryan survived with a broken ankle instead of the catastrophic injuries Marcus intended. As paramedics treated Ethan, Ryan identified the rider as a contractor employed by Vane Protective Services. Rees obtained arrest warrants before the Vane attorneys could reshape his statement. Marcus was taken into custody for conspiracy, drugging, evidence tampering, and attempted witness intimidation. Victor appeared on television within the hour and condemned his son with tears controlled perfectly for the camera. Victor resigned from Vane Capital, publicly sacrificing power to appear morally uncompromised. Ethan recognized the strategy: abandon a visible piece before anyone noticed the hand still moving the board. A guard delivered Ethan a note Marcus had written before processing. It contained only one line: "How many memories are you willing to bury before the people you save become strangers?" Ethan read the sentence beside his father's recovery bed, then looked at Grace sleeping with her head on Richard's shoulder. For the first time, saving his family frightened him almost as much as losing them. He sealed it in an evidence sleeve and gave it to Rees, resisting the instinct to keep a threat private simply because it involved a truth no one else understood. Rees found no fingerprints beyond the guards, but the paper carried blue cotton fibers and a watermark used by the Cross Foundation before Ethan was born. Evelyn recognized the paper immediately. An anonymous warning delivered to her dormitory 3 days before the hotel had arrived in an envelope with the same pale blue lining. The warning claimed Ethan planned to humiliate her, which was close enough to the truth to lure her into confronting him at the exact place Marcus had prepared. Evelyn gave Rees the envelope and requested that no copy go to either family. "I will not let the Crosses bury it," she said, "or the Vanes use me to sharpen another weapon." Ethan heard about the envelope from Rees, not Evelyn. He accepted the boundary, though the knowledge that Evelyn still regarded his family as a possible threat hurt precisely because it was reasonable. Maya traced the watermark to a locked archive beneath the Cross Foundation's original offices. Victor had served as the archive's volunteer director for 19 years. Richard objected to opening sealed charitable records during an active criminal case. Grace asked whether he feared damaging the foundation or discovering what the foundation had been designed to conceal. Her question ended the argument. Richard authorized an independent inventory led by Ruiz, Evelyn, Maya, and an outside forensic accountant. Ethan was not included. Evelyn explained that his presence could contaminate the process and make every discovery look like a weapon created for his defense. The old Ethan would have invoked ownership. This Ethan signed the access authorization and remained outside, learning that trust sometimes required accepting exclusion without turning it into rejection. The archive contained decades of scholarship files, medical grants, donor letters, and boxes labeled Ashford Community Relief. The name struck Ethan with dread, though he still could not remember why. Inside the first Ashford box were death certificates for 11 refinery workers and settlement agreements that prohibited their families from discussing defective pressure valves. A 12th victim was listed as Anna Vane, Victor's wife. Their 7-year-old daughter, Claire, had died 2 weeks later from burns and smoke damage. Marcus, then 6, had survived because he was sleeping at an aunt's house. The smiling child in the family photograph looked nothing like the man who had drugged Evelyn, yet Ethan recognized the same watchful eyes. Evelyn found internal memoranda showing Cross executives knew the replacement valves had failed safety tests. The final installation order carried Richard's electronic approval code. Richard read the document in his hospital room and denied authorizing it. His outrage sounded genuine, but Grace asked a more difficult question: what had he done after learning people were dead? Richard admitted the board convinced him that disclosure would bankrupt the refinery, destroy thousands of jobs, and leave the victims with nothing. He approved confidential settlements, and allowed the failed valves to be blamed on operator error. "I did not cause the explosion," he said, then stopped because everyone in the room understood he had spent 20 years using that sentence to avoid the rest of his guilt. Evelyn told him concealment had stolen the family's right to seek justice and turned deceased workers into the official cause of their own deaths. Richard answered that exposing everything now could collapse pensions, health plans, and the livelihoods of employees who had never seen Ashford. The argument had no clean side. Ethan saw his father protecting innocent workers with the same reasoning that once protected guilty executives. Ethan proposed separating restitution from corporate destruction, suspend family dividends, place cross-voting profits into an independent victims' trust, and preserve operating assets under court supervision. Richard accused him of designing moral policy with wealth he had never earned. Ethan accepted the insult but asked whether inherited control deserved greater protection than inherited grief. Grace left the room and returned carrying a cedar box Ethan had seen throughout childhood but never opened. It contained letters from Ashford families that company attorneys had redirected away from Richard. Grace had kept them after discovering the first one inside a discarded legal file. She read aloud a letter from a widow whose husband had been blamed for the valve failure. The woman did not ask for money. She asked that her children stop believing their father killed his friends. Richard listened with his hospital blanket pulled to his waist, and no boardroom table behind which to hide. By the 5th letter, he was crying too quietly for anyone to pretend not to notice. He authorized release of every Ashford record and signed Ethan's proposal for a temporary restitution trust, subject to approval by the families themselves. A future investment memory disappeared as Richard's signature dried. Ethan lost the name of a software company that would one day become worth billions. He felt the old hunger to seize the fading name before it vanished. Then he looked at the widow's letter and understood that a fortune was not being taken from him. It was merely returning to a future he no longer owned. Evelyn organized the first meeting with Ashford families in a community hall rather than a cross building. No company logos, private security uniforms, or press cameras were permitted. Ethan attended without speaking until invited. Some families shouted at Richard's empty chair, some refused restitution, and others demanded criminal prosecutions no trust could replace. Ben Carter, whose brother died at the refinery, asked Ethan why anyone should believe a family that found morality only after its enemies obtained evidence. Ethan answered that they should not believe promises. They should control the trust, appoint its auditors, and retain the power to remove every cross representative. Ben said that sounded like surrender. Ethan replied that surrendering control over another person's justice was not generosity. It was the minimum correction. The families agreed to review the structure without endorsing the Cross family. It was not reconciliation, but it prevented public relations from swallowing the first honest conversation. Victor moved before the records could be released. An anonymous source delivered newspapers an installation order carrying Richard's signature, and a message claiming the Cross family was creating a trust to purchase silence again. Markets opened with Cross Dominion shares falling. Prosecutors announced a formal Ashford inquiry, while 3 banks suspended expansion credit pending evidence of fraud. Richard offered to resign immediately. Ethan heard the instinct behind the decision. His father still believed love meant making himself the single sacrifice that allowed everyone else to avoid change. Evelyn opposed the resignation until the board established independent leadership. Removing Richard without reform would allow Victor's allies to inherit the same secret machinery. Maya examined the installation order and confirmed the signature was genuine. The approval date, however, fell 3 days after Richard underwent emergency surgery in Switzerland. Hospital immigration records proved Richard was outside the country, but the signature could still have been transferred from another document before digital systems stored reliable metadata. The original paper files had been moved years earlier to an off-site warehouse. Maya requested a preservation order and learned the building was scheduled for demolition the following morning. Ruiz obtained a warrant, but someone set the warehouse on fire before her team arrived. Flames already filled the loading dock when Ethan and Evelyn reached the police perimeter. Ethan started toward the entrance after hearing that one archive clerk remained unaccounted for. Evelyn caught his sleeve and reminded him that firefighters, not guilty heirs, were trained to enter burning buildings. A firefighter located the clerk near a side office but reported a collapsed cabinet blocking the exit. Ethan recognized the room number from the archive index he had reviewed with Maya. Instead of rushing inside, Ethan gave the fire captain the building plan and explained that an old service corridor opened behind the office wall. Firefighters broke through the corridor and rescued the clerk, who had protected one rolling cart of documents beneath a fire blanket. Ethan watched professionals save both a person and evidence without him becoming the center of the rescue. Evelyn noticed how difficult it was for him to remain behind the line. "You wanted to go in," she said. Ethan admitted that risking himself felt easier than waiting while someone else carried the danger. Evelyn answered that dramatic sacrifice could become selfish when it forced everyone who loved him to live with the result. The rescued cart contained the source contract from which Richard's signature had been copied. Ink, indentation, and a torn corner matched the forged installation order. Corporate secretary initials showed Victor had checked out the source document 2 days before the false approval was created. The evidence did not erase Richard's cover-up, but it proved Victor helped cause the explosion before presenting himself as its noblest survivor. Ruiz arrested Victor for forgery and attempted evidence destruction. Marcus's attorneys secured his temporary release on the hotel charges, arguing that Ryan's cooperation required independent review. Marcus went directly from the courthouse to the Ashford Memorial Wall and placed 2 white roses beneath his mother's and sister's names. Ethan watched from across the street with Ruiz nearby. He had come to confront Marcus, but the sight of the flowers made rehearsed accusations feel indecent. Marcus noticed him anyway. "My father forged the order," he said. "Your father learned the truth afterward and chose the company. Tell me which betrayal killed them more." Ethan did not defend Richard. He said the Cross family owed consequences for concealment, but Marcus had used Evelyn, Ryan, employees, and his own father as instruments. Marcus asked whether Ethan had not also used Evelyn when he lured her to the hotel. The question landed because justice spoken by a hypocrite could still be true. Ethan answered that stopping the final crime did not erase the first cruelty, and Evelyn owed him nothing for becoming less dangerous than he had intended to be. Marcus's smile faded. He had expected denial, anger, or a demand for moral superiority. Ethan's refusal to protect his ego removed the argument Marcus wanted. "Then perhaps you really did come back," Marcus said. "But you remember a kingdom." "I remember smoke." Ethan asked how Marcus knew about disappearing memories. Marcus touched the names on the wall and described waking from dreams containing events that had not yet happened. His fragments were different from Ethan's. Marcus remembered his father dying in prison, the Ashford Wall being demolished, and Ethan standing above an empire built from Vane ruins. Some fragments changed whenever Ethan acted. Marcus did not lose cherished memories. He suffered new versions of the same family grief, each vivid enough to feel lived. Their second chances were not equal gifts. Ethan had returned carrying advantages and regret, while Marcus had returned carrying wounds that multiplied whenever the future shifted. Ethan finally understood why Marcus asked how many people he could forget. Marcus was not reading Ethan's mind. He was measuring changes through his own recurring losses. Marcus claimed the phenomenon began with Dr. Helena Ward, a neuroscientist funded after Ashford to treat child trauma. He believed cross money had turned their grief into an experiment. Evelyn later traced Helena to a shuttered clinical program called the Continuity Project. Its papers studied how dying brains reconstructed decisive memories, but nothing explained physical return through time. Helena's former assistant refused sensational claims. She said trauma, guilt, and memory could distort identity, yet admitted Helena believed consciousness might rehearse an entire alternative life during the final seconds before death. Whether this is time travel, a dying dream, or something neither of you can name, Evelyn told Ethan. The choices still belong to the person making them now. Ethan stopped treating his memories as orders. He divided his notebook into facts that could be verified, emotions that needed examination, and predictions that no one should act upon without evidence. On the first page he wrote that no victory was real if it required stealing another person's choice. On the second, he wrote that loyalty without accountability was fear disguised as friendship. On the third, he began a sentence about Evelyn, then tore out the page because turning her into a rule for his redemption was another way of making her life about him. Evelyn saw the torn paper in a courthouse trash bin and understood what he had chosen not to write. The restraint moved her more than any declaration would have. At the Ashford hearing, Richard admitted the cover-up, named participating executives, and refused his attorney's suggestion that he blamed deceased board members. Victor testified afterward and claimed he had opposed concealment from the beginning. He produced meeting minutes in which he urged Richard to notify regulators. Maya noticed the minutes were printed on archival paper introduced 2 years after the explosion, the same blue fiber stock found in Marcus's note and Evelyn's warning. Evelyn presented the manufacturing records and asked Victor why a 20-year-old meeting had been documented on 18-year-old paper. Victor's composure cracked. Before he could answer, he swallowed from a water bottle, staggered against the witness table, and collapsed. Paramedics identified poisoning from his heart medication. Marcus entered the hospital accusing Cross Security of attempting to murder the only witness who could implicate Richard. The medication bottle carried Richard's fingerprints from a charity dinner where Victor had asked him to read the prescription label after forgetting his glasses. Surveillance footage confirmed the innocent contact but also created a plausible method for planting evidence. Prosecutors arrested Richard temporarily while laboratory analysis continued. With Richard detained and Victor unconscious, the board appointed Malcolm Sloan interim chairman. Malcolm suspended Ethan, removed Maya from the audit, and reassigned strategic development. Ethan left headquarters carrying only his notebook. Employees watched in silence, unable to know whether the young man who saved North Harbor was a reformer, conspirator, or merely another cross protecting blood. Outside, Lena handed him a box containing the team's personal coffee mugs. Noah had placed the department's battered coffee machine in the trunk of his car. Samuel offered a storage room at Helix as temporary workspace. Maya joined them under whistleblower protections, bringing copies she was legally permitted to retain. Evelyn did not move into the Cross mansion or become Ethan's private attorney. She established a separate office at Arthur's chambers and shared evidence only through Ruiz. The distance frustrated Ethan but protected every discovery from claims that Evelyn had become emotionally or financially dependent on him. The team traced Victor's medication through a distributor recently purchased by Renewal Harbor, the charity Victor created for Ashford families. Warehouse videos showed a man resembling Marcus entering after midnight. The image alone was weak, but Evelyn noticed the silver lighter he rolled across his fingers. Ethan remembered Marcus carrying that lighter since childhood because it was the last gift his mother had bought. Ruiz obtained a warrant and found it hidden inside Marcus's car. Residue on the lighter matched powder from Victor's altered capsules, while vehicle location records placed Marcus at the distributor. Marcus confessed after learning the laboratory evidence survived. Victor had volunteered to poison himself, believing another apparent cross attack would complete the family's destruction. Victor awakened and confirmed the plan. His willingness to turn his own body, and his surviving son, into evidence revealed revenge so consuming that even family had become expendable. Richard was released, but the board refused to restore him while Ashford remained unresolved. Malcolm announced an emergency sale of Helix and 2 cross ports to meet the frozen credit lines. Ethan faced the next battle without title, office, or reliable future knowledge. What remained was a crowded Helix storeroom filled with people who could leave, and had independently chosen to stay. Malcolm scheduled the asset sale vote for 10 days later, counting on panic to accomplish what Victor's allies could not win through argument. If the sale passed, Helix, 2 ports, and Cross Energy would be divided among buyers already waiting. Maya traced the prospective buyers through layers of debt. Each one had borrowed from the same offshore fund, but ownership disappeared behind nominee directors in 3 jurisdictions. Ethan recognized the structure from the old Future, where Marcus had dismantled Cross Dominion, while newspapers praised him for rescuing its strongest assets. The memory gave Ethan no account numbers or secret passwords. It gave him only the painful certainty that a lawful vote could complete the theft. Grace controlled 12% of voting shares. The employee pension fund held 9, independent Ashford families held 6, and scattered investors controlled everything else. Malcolm already had enough commitments to win unless Ethan persuaded people who had every reason to distrust the Cross name. Richard wanted to pledge the mansion and purchase votes from frightened investors. Ethan rejected the plan because using family wealth to preserve family control would confirm every accusation Ashford had raised. He began with the victims' families, visiting the community hall without reporters. Ben Carter met him at the door and asked whether restitution had become less important now that Ethan needed their shares. Ethan placed a voting proxy form on the table. It transferred the Ashford shares into an independent trust controlled by the families, not by him, Richard, or Cross Dominion. Ben read the clause allowing the trust to vote for Malcolm. "You came here to surrender the votes you need?" "They were never mine," Ethan answered. "If I make your freedom conditional on supporting me, then the trust is only another settlement written to purchase silence." Several families suspected theater. Ethan left the signed form and departed before anyone decided, denying himself the chance to pressure grief into gratitude. Evelyn waited outside beneath a broken street lamp. She asked whether he understood that those 6% could decide the company's fate. Ethan said he understood too well. The old version of him would have called coercion necessary because the outcome mattered. Marcus used the same excuse. Evelyn's expression softened, but she did not kiss him or offer forgiveness. She simply walked beside him to the car, close enough that their shoulders touched once. The employee pension meeting proved harder. Malcolm offered an immediate special dividend equal to 6 months of wages for every employee shareholder. Dock workers with medical bills, mortgages, and children in college did not treat the payment as a bribe. To them, Ethan's long-term vision could not buy groceries next week. Ethan refused to insult their need. He asked Malcolm to disclose that the dividend would be funded by selling the ports that employed many of the recipients. Malcolm called that fearmongering and promised the buyers would preserve every job for at least 1 year. Lena projected the sale contracts on the wall. They protected base salaries for 12 months but allowed automation, outsourcing, and pension restructuring immediately afterward. Ben asked Ethan what guarantee he offered instead. Ethan could have repeated the future growth he remembered, but memories were neither contracts nor collateral. He offered workers 2 elected board seats, public quarterly risk reports, and veto authority over transfers from the pension fund. "I cannot guarantee the market," Ethan said. "I can guarantee that no one will gamble with your retirement behind a locked door again." The pension fund voted for Ethan by 51%. The margin was too narrow for triumph and large enough to keep the company alive. Malcolm responded by leaking a recording of Ethan warning Richard about North Harbor before regulators announced the fraud. Financial networks replayed the sentence beside photographs from the hotel. Within hours, Ethan became either an insider trader, a criminal prophet, or the front man for a scheme larger than North Harbor. Federal investigators searched Helix and seized the computers containing its port research. Maya was questioned for 14 hours about the cancelled credit line. Samuel watched agents carry away prototypes while technicians stood helpless in the cold laboratory. He asked whether trusting Ethan had merely invited a richer war into their work. Ethan did not demand loyalty. He gave Samuel a signed release allowing Helix to repurchase Cross-Dominion's stake at cost if the investigation made their partnership intolerable. Samuel tore up the release. "I wanted the freedom to leave," he said. "Now I am choosing not to." Evelyn advised Ethan to tell investigators only what could be supported: the fragmented market image, the blue anchor, the forged insurance clue, and the independent verification Maya performed. She warned that calling it reincarnation might be emotionally true and legally useless, giving prosecutors a spectacular story instead of evidence. Noah reconstructed every account controlled by Ethan, Grace, and the Cross Trusts. None had traded North Harbor stock, derivatives, competitors, or insurers. Maya's timestamped messages proved she contacted the underwriter before any regulator notified Cross-Dominion. The company avoided a loss but earned no secret profit. Investigators cleared the trading allegation while leaving the source of Ethan's warning unresolved. Malcolm used the uncertainty to move the shareholder vote forward by 48 hours. On the morning of the vote, Victor transferred his remaining shares to Marcus through a prison-approved family trust. Marcus obtained permission to attend under armed supervision. He entered the meeting hall wearing a plain gray suit and the calm smile Ethan remembered from the day Cross-Dominion once became Vane property. "The law is beautiful," Marcus murmured as guards led him past. "It can make theft look like consent and revenge look like governance." Malcolm opened with graphs showing frozen credit, legal costs, and falling confidence. His argument contained enough truth to frighten even directors who despised him. Maya presented the offshore borrowing pattern behind the buyers. Because the final beneficiary remained concealed, Malcolm dismissed it as coincidence rather than conspiracy. Grace's shares, the pension block, and reform-minded investors left Ethan 4% short. The Ashford Trust had not announced its decision. Malcolm called the final vote. Ethan looked toward the empty seats reserved for victims' families and accepted that honoring their freedom might cost him the company. Ben entered after voting had begun, followed by relatives carrying photographs of the 11 workers. They did not take seats among the Cross delegation. Ben announced that the Ashford Trust would oppose the sale. "We are not voting for the Cross family," he said. "We are voting against being used by the Vane family again." The sale failed by 2%. Applause rose from employees, but Ethan remained seated because the family's decision was not his victory to celebrate. Shareholders removed Malcolm as interim chairman. Richard declined immediate restoration while prosecutors reviewed Ashford and nominated Maya as independent chair. Maya accepted only after the board approved employee seats, victim oversight, and a rule preventing the Cross family from removing her without an independent vote. Richard struggled before voting yes. Ethan watched his father surrender power without surrendering responsibility, a quieter courage than the dramatic resignation Richard first offered. Marcus returned to detention smiling despite defeat. Before leaving, he told Ethan that companies were easier to replace than reputations. The meaning became clear that evening when Evelyn's sealed medical report appeared online. Anonymous accounts published the sedatives in her blood, photographs of her torn dress, and invented descriptions of what happened inside the room. Strangers debated whether she had been drugged enough to count as a victim. Others accused her of using scandal to gain power over the Cross Heir. Arthur wanted every website sued before sunrise. Ethan ordered Cross media companies to remove the files, then stopped when Evelyn called him. "You do not get to become the person who decides which version of me the public may see," she said. "Even when you believe you are protecting me." Ethan cancelled the order and asked what she wanted. Evelyn requested legal tracing, platform preservation notices, and security for her family, nothing that would silence lawful criticism. She held a press conference the next day. Ethan waited in another room because standing beside her could turn her testimony into a scene about his redemption. Evelyn described the hotel plan, the evidence, and the humiliation of having private medical facts converted into public property. She did not cry until a reporter asked why she had entered a hotel with Ethan at all, as if one unwise decision transferred ownership of everything that followed. Evelyn steadied herself and answered, "Consent to a conversation is not consent to drugs, cameras, assault, or a lifetime of strangers examining my body." Survivors across the country repeated the sentence. Privacy advocates offered help, and the attack Marcus designed to isolate Evelyn gave her a community he could not control. Afterward, she found Ethan sitting alone behind the stage with both hands clenched between his knees. He apologized for the original invitation again. Evelyn stopped him, saying endless apologies could force her to spend the rest of her life reassuring him. "Then tell me what helps now," Ethan said. Evelyn sat beside him. "Do the work when I am not watching. Believe me when it costs you something. And do not turn my pain into proof that you deserve love." Ethan promised only the first two, because the third was a lesson he would have to practice rather than promise. Evelyn placed her hand over his for several quiet seconds. It was not forgiveness, romance, or a public declaration. It was trust offered in the smallest amount she could safely give. Marcus's next attack targeted cross-community banks. Coordinated accounts spread insolvency rumors while hundreds of depositors received anonymous messages urging immediate withdrawals. Lines formed before branches opened. Elderly customers carried envelopes of savings, parents emptied education accounts, and frightened people transformed a false rumor into a real liquidity crisis. Richard offered the mansion as collateral. Grace removed her wedding ring and placed it beside the property documents without a word. Ethan remembered a bank run from the old future but no longer recalled which emergency lender had stopped it. The future had finally become less useful than the people in the room. Noah discovered that cross ports held prepaid shipping guarantees backed by contracted cargo fees. Banks valued them poorly because they were difficult to understand and impossible to trade quickly. Lena proposed converting only the near-term guarantees into short-duration notes, but warned that disguising risk would repeat the practices that caused past financial collapses. Evelyn brought in an independent consumer finance lawyer. Together they rewrote every disclosure in language a shipping clerk could understand. Union pension funds purchased the notes after their own advisors inspected the cargo contracts. The financing came from workers who understood the ports, not investors seduced by hidden complexity. Regulators opened emergency liquidity lines once the transparent private financing demonstrated that the banks possessed real assets. Withdrawals slowed. Grace put her ring back on, and Richard quietly admitted that offering cherished objects had felt useful only because the harder solution required trusting people outside the family. The bank survived, but the coordinated accounts had purchased access to cross systems while employees were distracted. At midnight, malware froze cargo tracking across 2 ports. Cranes stopped above ships, refrigerated containers lost routing priority, and navigation records began overwriting themselves. Samuel connected Helix's independent microgrid controllers to essential cranes, restoring limited manual movement without reconnecting the infected network. Noah isolated the malicious code inside a server rented under Cole Mercer's identity, the third man from the hotel who had vanished before Ruiz could question him. Ruiz found Cole near the Canadian border carrying a forged passport supplied by Vane Protective Services. He claimed Marcus had threatened to expose his family unless he maintained the server. Cole agreed to testify, but the night before his deposition he received a video showing a stranger following his younger sister home from school. Ethan's first impulse was to promise that cross security would protect them. He stopped and asked Ruiz what lawful witness protection could provide without making Cole indebted to him. Ruiz relocated the family through federal channels. Cole testified remotely and surrendered encryption keys linking Marcus to the bank rumors and port attack. Prosecutors prepared racketeering charges. Marcus answered by escaping court transport with help from 2 former Vane contractors. His electronic monitor was discovered beneath his mother's name at the Ashford Memorial. A note beside it read, "Let the place that began the lie decide which future deserves to live." The restored refinery was scheduled to reopen in 3 days as the Ashford Clean Energy Campus, with victims' families, cross executives, scientists, and elected officials attending. Canceling would protect lives but hand Marcus the symbol he wanted. Proceeding normally would turn grieving families into bait. Ethan proposed moving the public ceremony online and giving families the choice to attend a later private memorial. Ben supported the change because courage did not require pretending a bomb threat was ceremonial weather. Ethan secretly offered to remain at the empty campus as bait. Evelyn learned of the plan from Reese and confronted him in the Helix storeroom. "You listened when I said not to enter a fire," she said. "Now you are building a larger fire and calling it strategy." Ethan argued that Marcus wanted him, not the families. Evelyn answered that offering Marcus exactly what he wanted was not sacrifice. It was surrender disguised as control. She proposed a different operation: thermal drones, tagged equipment, isolated microgrids, empty buildings, and tactical teams controlling every route. Ethan gave Reese command authority and signed a written order forbidding himself from entering any unsecured zone. The operation began before dawn. Sensors detected movement inside an abandoned cooling tunnel leading beneath the memorial garden. Marcus triggered a small charge near the river fence, drawing one tactical unit away. A second signal attempted to open the campus grid to a destructive surge. Helix's isolated controllers rejected the command. Samuel had designed them to fail safely because Ethan funded a scientist's right to refuse dangerous shortcuts. Police cornered one contractor in the tunnel, but Marcus escaped into the old archive wing carrying a transmitter connected to charges no map showed. He called Ethan from inside and played a recording of Grace begging for help. Ethan knew the voice could be fabricated, yet every memory of losing his mother screamed louder than reason. Ethan stood at the security line with the written order in his hand while Marcus counted backward over the phone, forcing him to choose between the plan he trusted and the fear he had never learned to survive. Ethan closed his eyes, heard Grace's recorded sob, and forced himself to notice what fear wanted him to ignore. She called him Ethan, though his mother had called him my impossible boy, whenever truly frightened. He handed the phone to Reese instead of crossing the security line. She confirmed Grace was safe with Richard at the command center and ordered technicians to trace the call. Marcus finished counting. Nothing exploded. The countdown had never controlled a bomb. It had tested whether Ethan could still be separated from everyone by threatening someone he loved. "You left her to die," Marcus said over the phone. Ethan looked through the glass at Grace arguing with an officer who would not let her bring food into the command room. "No," he answered. "I finally trusted the people protecting her." The call trace placed Marcus inside the old archive wing. Thermal cameras showed two heat signatures, Marcus and an unidentified person bound near the records room. The hostage was Daniel Price, the retired archive clerk who had preserved the source contract during the warehouse fire. Marcus needed him to unlock a concealed evidence vault Victor had used after Ashford. Reese refused Ethan's demand to negotiate in person. Evelyn supported her, reminding him that being emotionally important to Marcus did not make him tactically qualified. Ethan offered information instead. Marcus hated enclosed darkness after hiding inside a maintenance pipe during the Ashford explosion. If alarms sealed the archive doors, panic might make him move toward the river exit. Ruiz used the insight without surrendering command. Tactical officers opened the river corridor, while quietly sealing every other route. Marcus recognized the funnel too late, and ignited shelves inside the records room. Smoke concealed him from thermal cameras and threatened documents capable of exposing Victor's entire network. Daniel triggered an old mechanical fire shutter before Marcus dragged him away. The shutter trapped the fire within one section but also trapped Daniel on the wrong side. Samuel saw rising temperatures on the campus grid and released coolant from nearby Helix cabinets through a maintenance conduit designed for battery emergencies. The coolant could not extinguish paper, but it lowered the corridor temperature enough for firefighters to reach Daniel without entering a flashover. Marcus escaped toward the river carrying a pistol and a portable detonator. Ruiz's team surrounded the dock while Evelyn remained behind armored cover and kept him talking through a loudspeaker. Marcus threatened to destroy the microgrid feeding the restored campus. Samuel confirmed the system had already isolated itself, but Marcus refused to believe Ethan had built anything he could not control centrally. "That is the difference between you," Evelyn told him. Ethan funded people who could tell him no. You built a plan in which everyone had to obey. Marcus pressed the detonator. A transformer burst harmlessly in an empty service yard, while the campus lights continued shining from independent helix modules. His final threat failed because of a safety rule established when Samuel negotiated the right to reject dangerous production targets. Ethan approached only after Rees authorized him and officers kept clear lines of fire. He stopped far beyond Marcus's reach, refusing to turn negotiation into another private duel. Marcus aimed the pistol at him. Your father killed my family, and the world gave you another life. Where was our second chance? Ethan did not answer with innocence. He said Richard had hidden the truth and deserved judgment, but no amount of inherited guilt could grant either of them ownership over another innocent life. Police carried Daniel from the archive corridor. Seeing the hostage alive stripped Marcus of the death he intended to place permanently between them. Evelyn read Anna and Claire Vane's names from the recovered ledger, followed by the names of the 11 workers Victor had taught Marcus to treat as background to his private grief. The ledger showed Victor accepted a secret personal settlement months before befriending Richard. He had hidden additional compensation from other families while collecting their anger as political power. Marcus's pistol lowered by a fraction. The revelation did not make Victor responsible for the explosion or Richard innocent of concealment. It destroyed the purity of the revenge Marcus had built his identity around. Richard stepped into view despite Rees's order to remain inside. He admitted that Victor's corruption changed nothing about his own decision to protect Cross Dominion. I cannot give your mother and sister back, Richard said. But I will stand in court and name what I did without asking your forgiveness. Marcus's hand shook. Ethan did not rush him, promise mercy, or offer himself as payment. Evelyn said pain could explain the road Marcus took, but the next step still belonged to him. After a long silence, Marcus placed the pistol on the dock and moved away from it. Ruiz arrested him without adding another body to the Ashford ledger. Ethan expected relief. Instead, his remaining market memories collapsed at once, company names, election results, patents, and prices dissolving into colorless impressions. He still remembered his first life emotionally, the empty penthouse, the unanswered calls, his parents' funerals, and Evelyn's absence. Every shortcut that might rebuild its empire was gone. Evelyn found him sitting beside an ambulance. When he told her the future had disappeared, she asked what remained. Ethan looked toward his living parents, the team gathered around Samuel, and Daniel arguing with paramedics about the rescued archive. Everything I should have learned without dying, he said. Victor confessed after reviewing the ledger and the recovered files. He admitted the forged installation order, the poison plan, shell acquisitions, witness intimidation, and years spent shaping Marcus into an instrument. Marcus refused Victor's request for forgiveness. You taught me that grief excused anything, he said during a recorded interview. Forgiving you now would only prove I learned nothing. Richard pleaded guilty to obstruction and conspiracy connected to the original cover-up. Prosecutors could not prove he ordered the faulty valves, but he stopped using that fact as a shield against the truth. His cooperation, restitution, health condition, and lack of later financial gain led to home confinement, public service, and a permanent ban on executive office. Some Ashford families considered the sentence too light. Ethan did not ask them to celebrate accountability merely because it hurt his father. Marcus received a lengthy prison term for the hotel conspiracy, cyber tax, poisoning scheme, witness threats, escape, and armed hostage-taking. Evelyn opposed the sentence designed only to satisfy public anger, but supported conditions requiring restitution and eventual restorative justice review if Marcus accepted responsibility. Ethan visited Marcus once after sentencing. A wall of reinforced glass prevented either man from turning the meeting into another test of physical courage. Marcus asked whether Ethan still remembered the empire he once ruled. Ethan said he remembered being alone at its highest window but could no longer remember how he climbed there. Then I took something from you after all, Marcus said. You helped me lose the future that made me like you, Ethan answered. I am not sure that was a victory for either of us. Marcus warned that Cross Dominion would corrupt him again. Ethan agreed the danger would never disappear, which was why no family should possess unchecked control. He left Marcus a public copy of the Ashford ledger. The gift offered no absolution, only names that grief had reduced to pieces on Victor's board. Maya remained independent chair under permanent court oversight. Employee representatives, community members, and Ashford families received seats with real voting power. Ethan supported conversion of the Cross family trust into a public benefit structure, surrendering the power to remove those representatives when they opposed him. Richard struggled with the document for 3 days before signing. He told Ethan that preserving a legacy had once meant keeping control inside the bloodline. Ethan replied that a legacy worth preserving should survive the family losing the right to command it. 1 year after the hotel, Helix launched its first commercial system at Cross Harbor. Firefighters, technicians, and insurers supervised the demonstration without staged miracles. Samuel dedicated the safety laboratory to all Ashford victims, including Anna and Claire Vane, refusing to divide the dead according to the crimes of those who survived them. Lena became president of Strategic Ventures, and Noah led a new risk transparency team whose reports even Ethan could not suppress. Maya offered Ethan the chief executive position. He declined until the board completed an external search and published the criteria by which candidates would be judged. 3 candidates exceeded him in experience. Ethan spent months learning from their interviews rather than assuming the role belonged to him by narrative right. The board ultimately selected him because he combined operational support, employee confidence, technical partnerships, and acceptance of oversight. Ethan accepted a 3-year term with annual community review. His first act was to appoint one unsuccessful candidate as chief operating officer at a salary larger than his own. Evelyn completed law school and joined an independent civil rights organization. She refused Cross Dominion's legal department because loving Ethan would become impossible if her livelihood depended on pleasing his board. For months they remained friends whose conversations sometimes lasted until dawn, and sometimes ended in anger before dinner. Ethan began therapy to confront control, shame, and the fear that happiness would vanish whenever he stopped anticipating disaster. Evelyn attended trauma counseling on her own terms. Public courage had not stopped nightmares, distrust of hotel doors, or the sensation of strangers reading her medical report. Neither used therapy as proof of being healed. They learned that recovery could be honest even while incomplete. Ethan eventually asked Evelyn on a real date, using no private venue, corporate event, or expensive gesture that could make refusal difficult. She selected a crowded bookstore cafe in daylight and informed Arthur where she would be, which Ethan accepted without pretending the precaution offended him. They talked about novels, food, Lena's terrifying budget meetings, and everything except Ashford until silence stopped feeling like danger. Their second date ended early when Ethan answered 3 work calls. Evelyn told him she would not compete with emergencies he created by refusing to delegate. Ethan apologized, delegated the decision to his operating officer, and did not ask Evelyn to resume the evening as a reward. A week later, she invited him to try again because changed behavior, not the apology, made the invitation feel safe. Months afterward, they attempted dinner at the hotel restaurant where the first life had broken apart. Evelyn reached the lobby, saw the elevator doors, and could no longer breathe. Ethan canceled the reservation before she finished explaining. They ate tacos beneath a bus shelter while rain soaked Ethan's suit. Evelyn laughed when hot sauce landed on his cuff, then cried because laughter in that neighborhood had once seemed impossible. Ethan did not call the evening a victory over trauma. He held her hand only after she reached for his and let the hotel remain unconquered. Their relationship grew through breakfasts, court recesses, missed trains, family dinners, and arguments no cameras recorded. Ethan learned that apologizing repeatedly could become a demand that Evelyn soothed his guilt. Evelyn learned that expecting betrayal in every mistake could punish the man before her for the one who once existed. They developed rules for conflict: no threats of leaving to win, no corporate investigators inside personal disagreements, no silence lasting longer than one night without explanation. Grace watched them practice the honesty she and Richard had avoided. She persuaded Richard to begin counseling during home confinement. Richard first treated every session like hostile testimony. Months later, He apologized to Grace for making her preserve the family's conscience while he preserved its reputation. Grace did not forgive him in a single scene. She required disclosure, separate finances for her foundation, and months of consistent truth before they shared a bedroom again. Watching his parents rebuild slowly taught Ethan that maintenance did not make happiness less complete. It made happiness real enough to survive ordinary days. 2 years later, Helix developed a cheaper storage chemistry suitable for neighborhoods. Investors urged Ethan to lock every patent and charge cities the highest possible price. Ethan proposed affordable licensing for safety technology while keeping premium industrial systems profitable enough to fund research. Maya forced the proposal through independent modeling rather than accepting Ethan's moral certainty. The numbers showed wider adoption could produce lower margins and larger long-term revenue. The plan succeeded without requiring goodness to be financially magical. Cross Dominion earned less per installation but gained stable contracts across hundreds of communities. Evelyn later represented residents accusing a Cross subsidiary of hiding groundwater contamination. Executives expected Ethan to pressure her privately. Critics expected Evelyn to weaken the case to protect their relationship. Ethan ordered full document preservation and recused himself from settlement approval. Evelyn pursued evidence without discussing strategy at home. The investigation proved a regional manager had concealed leaking tanks to protect his bonus. Cross Dominion paid cleanup costs, compensated residents, and accepted an independent safety monitor. Evelyn won the case. Ethan lost money, dismissed 2 executives, and came home carrying groceries because it was his turn to cook. Dinner burned while they argued over whether his recusal had come too late. The disagreement ended with revised company policy, not with one person surrendering for peace. Ethan proposed 6 months later beside the same kitchen sink, after a smoke alarm interrupted the meal he had finally learned to cook. The ring had belonged to Grace's grandmother. Ethan said it carried family history but no demand that Evelyn become responsible for redeeming that history. "I do not need you to complete me," he said. "I want to keep choosing a life beside you when neither of us knows what happens next." Evelyn asked whether he would still choose it if she defeated Cross Dominion in court again. Ethan said he hoped she would, whenever the company deserved to lose. She accepted, then made him repeat the proposal after turning off the smoke alarm because she refused to remember such an important answer through electronic screaming. Reporters called Evelyn the woman who reformed a villain. She corrected them publicly. Ethan changed himself, while she decided whether the changed man belonged in her life. Ethan added that Evelyn was not a reward presented after sufficient suffering. She was free to choose him, challenge him, or leave him, and that freedom was why her yes mattered. Their engagement did not end conflict, therapy, legal opposition, or fear. It gave those difficulties a home built from consent rather than obligation. On the night before their wedding, Ethan dreamed again of dying alone above the city. But this time he woke to Evelyn's message reminding him not to be late for the future they had chosen without prophecy. Ethan arrived at the Ashford Memorial Garden 20 minutes early and still found Arthur Shaw waiting beside the entrance with a chess clock, prepared to interpret punctuality as evidence of character. Richard attended under the final month of his home confinement order. He wore no cross-signet ring and carried no speech, only the quiet nervousness of a father unsure whether he had earned a place near his son's happiness. Ethan crossed the garden and embraced him before uncertainty became another family tradition. Richard held on longer than either man expected. Grace adjusted Ethan's tie, cried, denied crying, and then blamed the garden wind despite the complete absence of wind. Maya officiated beneath lights powered by the first commercial Helix system. Lena had inspected every cable, Noah had audited the seating chart, and Samuel had installed enough backup power for a small city. The names of the 11 refinery workers, Anna Vane and Claire Vane, remained visible along the garden wall. No flowers or decorations covered them. Some directors had objected that a wedding should not be held beside a memorial. Evelyn answered that happiness built through truth did not require the past to be hidden for photographs. She entered with Arthur, then stopped halfway down the path and walked the remaining distance alone because choosing Ethan was hers to complete. Ethan had imagined this moment throughout 2 lives. yet no remembered fantasy included the tiny crease beside Evelyn's mouth when she tried not to laugh at his expression. Maya asked whether he chose Evelyn without ownership, debt, rescue, or fear. Ethan answered yes before his voice broke on the final word. Maya asked whether Evelyn chose Ethan without obligation, illusion, or surrender. Evelyn answered yes, adding that choice would remain a verb after the ceremony. Their vows contained no promise that pain would disappear. Ethan promised not to convert fear into control, and Evelyn promised not to mistake every imperfect day for the return of the man he had been. When they kissed, the garden remained quiet for one astonished heartbeat before Grace began applauding early, and everyone else followed. Richard offered Ethan the cross-signet ring during the reception. Ethan accepted it as family history, then placed it in the public Ashford archive rather than on his hand. Evelyn married a man, he told Richard. Not the next link in a chain. Richard looked toward the memorial wall and said the chain had needed to end. Arthur challenged Ethan to a wedding night chess game and defeated him in 16 moves. Ethan's willingness to laugh at the loss pleased him more than any answer during years of interrogation. Marcus sent no message from prison. Ethan felt grateful that the day contained no final test, secret threat, or dramatic forgiveness demanding space inside their marriage. Ethan and Evelyn spent their honeymoon in a fishing town where their surnames impressed no one and the cottage heater worked only when kicked near the bottom. They rode bicycles, burned breakfast, argued over directions, and discovered that peace was not empty when shared with someone who did not need a performance. One morning, Evelyn asked whether he missed knowing the future. Ethan admitted uncertainty still frightened him, then pointed out that certainty had never taught him how to be happy. They returned to find Cross-Dominion functioning perfectly without Ethan. He considered that independence one of his greatest achievements rather than an insult to his importance. Richard completed home confinement and began speaking at business schools about institutional cowardice. He described himself as a warning, never as a hero redeemed by confession. Grace expanded the Ashford Family Center into a permanent health and education fund governed by victims' relatives and community representatives. She required Richard to attend board meetings without voting rights, allowing him to listen to people whose lives his decisions had once reduced to legal exposure. Their marriage improved slowly. They traveled, argued honestly, apologized before silence hardened, and stopped using Ethan as the bridge across every disagreement. Ethan and Evelyn built a home near the river rather than living in the Cross mansion. It had a modest kitchen, too many books, and windows that opened without asking a security system for permission. They protected 3 evenings each week from work. Emergencies still happened, but neither labeled ordinary ambition an emergency merely because powerful people were impatient. Evelyn continued opposing Cross-Dominion when evidence required it. Ethan continued disliking the experience without confusing discomfort with betrayal. Their first anniversary dinner was interrupted by a call from Samuel reporting that Helix had passed the International Neighborhood Storage Standard. Ethan congratulated him, switched off the phone, and returned to cold pasta because shared celebration did not require abandoning the person already at the table. 2 years after the wedding, Evelyn placed a pregnancy test beside Ethan's coffee before an investor call. He stared at the result, checked the instructions twice, and asked whether 2 lines definitely meant what he believed they meant. Evelyn laughed until he began crying. Ethan canceled the call and spent the morning alternating between joy and terror while she held his hand. Their daughter, Hope, was born during a storm that disabled part of the city grid. Helix batteries kept the hospital operating until utility crews restored service. Ethan heard her first cry and lost the last emotional image of his lonely penthouse death. It did not feel stolen. The old ending simply had nowhere left to live. Richard held Hope with hands that had signed billion-dollar contracts without trembling. He promised her that affection would never depend on achievement. Arthur presented the newborn with a miniature chessboard, while Grace informed him that pieces small enough to swallow were not an acceptable expression of love. Ethan took parental leave despite predictions that Cross-Dominion would weaken. Maya publicly thanked the baby for forcing the chief executive to test his own succession policies. The company continued growing. Ethan learned that leadership measured by indispensable presence was merely another kind of organizational failure. At 3 in the morning, however, No policy could persuade Hope to sleep. Ethan walked the hallway with her against his chest and felt more useful than he had in any boardroom. Evelyn returned to legal work when she felt ready, not when commentators demanded proof that motherhood had changed nothing. They hired help without pretending love required exhaustion. Even with assistance, they preserved bedtime, breakfast, and one daily hour when no employee could reach either parent. Hope's first words sounded like light. Richard insisted she said prophet until Grace threatened to revoke his grandfather privileges. Her first steps carried her from Evelyn to Ethan, and immediately back again, establishing a lifelong refusal to remain where anyone placed her. Ethan kept no camera running. One precious event could exist without becoming evidence, branding, or content for strangers. Cross-Dominion expanded neighborhood microgrids through partnerships in which residents held controlling local shares. The arrangement produced slower initial returns but lower opposition, better maintenance, and contracts that survived changes in government. Samuel's safety patents became an international standard. Helix researchers grew wealthy through employee ownership without surrendering scientific publication rights. Lena created a venture program for overlooked inventors under the same fair control principles that had protected Samuel. Noah launched a public database identifying financial risks before executives could hide them inside complicated products. Maya became the nation's most trusted corporate chair and displayed the magazine cover only when she wanted to irritate Ethan. At the end of Ethan's first term, employee, community, and shareholder reviews renewed him without opposition. He accepted another limited term, rejecting proposals to restore permanent family control even after his popularity made approval possible. Evelyn founded the Choice Initiative to defend survivor privacy and challenge technology-enabled abuse. The organization helped pass national rules requiring hotels and digital platforms to preserve evidence while protecting victims' identities. The law carried no cross or Shaw name. Evelyn wanted people to remember the protection, not the family attached to its creation. Their second child, James, arrived 2 years after Hope and inherited Grace's calm eyes and Ethan's determination not to sleep. Hope asked whether the hospital accepted returns. Ethan said brothers were permanent, privately admitting he had considered the same question during the fourth sleepless night. Evelyn found him beside the nursery window with James on his shoulder. The city below resembled the view from Ethan's old penthouse, but every light now led home rather than away from it. Marcus entered restorative justice preparation in prison and confessed to offenses prosecutors had never connected to him. His cooperation cleared 2 people framed through Victor's shell network and returned stolen funds to several Ashford families. Ben Carter became the first victim representative willing to meet him. Ben offered no forgiveness, only the names of workers Marcus had reduced to symbols in his revenge. Marcus began writing letters to those harmed by his attacks. Many went unanswered, and the program required him to accept silence without treating it as cruelty. Ethan received one letter thanking him for not crossing the security line at the campus. It contained no request for friendship or release. He placed the letter in the Ashford archive instead of carrying responsibility for Marcus's recovery into his home. After 8 years, a review board granted Marcus supervised release based on cooperation, accountability, and demonstrated change, not because Ethan intervened. Ethan did not oppose the decision, but he also did not invite Marcus to meet the children. Safety and compassion did not require immediate intimacy. Marcus worked in an archival clinic that helped communities uncover concealed corporate records. Months later, Ethan met him in the memorial garden with Reese nearby and no cameras present. Marcus apologized without explaining his pain again or asking whether the apology had earned anything. Ethan said trust could grow only through time and action, but neither family would teach its children to inherit the war. Marcus placed his mother's silver lighter in the archive beside the ledger. They parted without becoming brothers and without needing to remain enemies. Ethan considered honest distance more merciful than a false reconciliation written to satisfy an audience. Richard's early heart treatment allowed him to remain healthy into old age. He and Grace traveled together and sent grandchildren postcards from places they once postponed visiting. Arthur lived long enough to teach Hope chess, accuse James of cheating, and lose honestly to both of them. Sunday dinners expanded until the table included Shaws, Crosses, colleagues, neighbors, former rivals, and children hiding vegetables inside napkins. Ethan sometimes paused in the doorway, overwhelmed by noise that would once have annoyed him and now sounded like proof of life. Evelyn always noticed. She reached for his hand without asking him to explain a gratitude too large for words. Their third child, Lily, was born 7 years after the wedding with Evelyn's serious eyes and a cry capable of silencing an entire maternity ward. Hope welcomed her like a commanding officer. James offered half a cookie as a treaty and became offended when the newborn declined to sign. Ethan carried Lily through the Cross mansion, where Grace had transformed the formal ballroom into a playroom covered with books, paint, and washable furniture. Richard pretended to object until Lily drew purple lines across one of his expensive shoes. He wore the marked shoes during his next ethics lecture and called them evidence that priorities could improve after public disgrace. On the 10th anniversary of the hotel night, Evelyn asked Ethan to return to the building with her. The hotel had changed owners. The former suite now served as a training center teaching staff to recognize drugging, preserve evidence, and protect vulnerable guests. Ethan stopped outside the door and waited for guilt to command his body. Evelyn opened it first, not because she needed to be brave for him, but because entering was her decision. They watched a training exercise in which an employee protected a simulated victim's privacy while securing a hidden camera. The room where 2 lives almost ended had become a place designed to keep strangers from suffering the same fate. Evelyn asked whether Ethan regretted waking there. He said he regretted the man who arranged the meeting, but never the chance to become her husband and their children's father. She kissed the cheek she had once expected to strike, closing a circle without pretending the beginning no longer mattered. That evening, Cross Dominion celebrated its centennial in the Ashford Garden with employees, community shareholders, victims' families, scientists, and investors seated together. Maya announced that the company had become the world's largest public benefit port energy network, while maintaining the strongest worker pension performance in its history. Richard expected Ethan to unveil a statue honoring the Cross founders. Ethan instead revealed a wall naming every worker, inventor, resident, whistleblower, and family who rebuilt the company. The Cross name appeared in the same size as every other name. Richard studied the wall and said the legacy was larger than the dynasty he once feared losing. Ethan abandoned his prepared speech when Lily climbed onto the stage and demanded the microphone. Hope followed to supervise, and James announced that supervision required cake. Holding his children beside Evelyn, Ethan told the crowd that a second chance was not permission to control the future. It was the responsibility to make choices one could defend after every advantage, title, and prediction disappeared. Evelyn said happiness was not a life without consequences or painful history. It was the freedom to face truth without losing the people willing to face it beside you. Fireworks rose above his healthy parents, loyal friends, thriving company, and 3 children arguing over which color belonged to whom. Ethan had reached the summit again, but this time it was wide enough for everyone he loved. Evelyn leaned into him and asked whether he regretted anything. Ethan looked at the impossible, noisy, overflowing life they had chosen together and answered, "Not in this life."